All right, well, hello there. This is Matt Petrowski. We're going to be taking a look at a FileMaker tutorial video here. I'm choosing to do this as a live stream. Just makes it easier for me to actually record this, but anybody who shows up, they can ask questions and maybe we'll have video chat of that. So what is this video about? We are taking a look at, actually let's switch to that screen, adding a splash screen. I've been working on a series, which is our video about custom functions. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at in this video. Now I'm going to be doing this real time, so obviously any mistakes that I make, you can correct me if you're on the chat. Otherwise, watching this video, you'll see those mistakes in real time. I figure some of you like to actually learn as you code, and that's what I'm going to do. So let's switch to my desktop here, and we'll take a look at how we're going to do this. Now I have my files open. Here's the custom function database that we're actually working with. I've been working with on this on my main tutorial over at FileMakerMagazine.com. Now, the whole reason that you want to put a start screen or a splash screen into your solution is, one, it makes it look more professional, but two, there are some big advantages that you will get when you put in when you implement this in a certain way, in a certain method. Currently, this file does not have any startup tables. Now, when I'm referring to a startup table, I'm basically talking about a dedicated table that you intentionally keep empty. And there's a very good reason for that, for this. Actually, if we go into define database, which I'll go into right now, define database, we can see that currently there are no tables called startup. So the trick here with regards to adding a splash screen is that you're going to take advantage and do two things at one time. The first thing is you're adding obviously the professional look or the splash screen. The second reason is you're adding a startup table that is empty, and it's empty on purpose. The reason being that every time that FileMaker starts up, if it starts up on an empty table, it doesn't have to load any records. So you get a very big speed advantage by actually loading up an empty startup table. So the first thing that you're going to do is down here at the bottom under your table name, just create a new table simply called startup. And this has got to be one of the easiest things you could ever do to make your solution start up faster, is create that table. And then for the most part, you see right here where it says 0 fields, 0 records, you're going to keep it like that. I should say on occasion you will maybe create one record, and you may add some global fields depending on how your database is going to start up. Sometimes you'll do a user check or something that will check various features of the environment, but other than that, you keep things really, really trim by keeping this pretty much a 0 field or a very minimal field table. Now this startup table is going to become your default startup for the file. And if you haven't set this up before, you're going to do this under the file options. So the first thing we're going to need is a layout that's actually associated to that table. So when I go to the manage area and I'm going to manage my layouts, we can see that in my list of layouts, I currently do not have any layouts that are based on that startup. Now, if you've never watched any of my videos before and you're wondering what the heck is this @ symbol, this is just a naming or a way that I use nomenclature in order to define what is a developer-specific table. You can see I have a folder right here called developer. And in this particular solution, there's really only one layout. That's the one layout that the users interact with on this particular file. So what I do is typically I will add a developer table occurrence. Now that basically looks like, as I open up the define database, it basically looks like this in my relationship graph. Over here on the side, what I tend to do is I add all of my developer tables. And you can see that FileMaker automatically added this startup. Now, quite easily, I can just double click this, and I would typically just rename whatever default table occurrence FileMaker adds as the @ symbol startup. And then what happens is that particular table occurrence intentionally is never connected to anything else. It's basically, I refer to it as a base table for the purpose of development. And when you look at, as I zoom out here, the way that I manage all of my layouts, and we'll zoom in here again, These developer layouts, these are layouts that really no user ever accesses. They're really only for me to be able to show all of my data and all of the information that isn't on the normal layouts. Say this is a normal layout as indicated by the name here, layout double chevron functions. I know that's the function layout. These are all specifically for me. So if you've ever seen this in anywhere in FileMaker, this came out of how I manage all of my behind the scenes developer tables. So FileMaker in this case didn't automatically create a table for me, or excuse me, a layout. Sometimes it will. So I'm going to create a new layout, and I'm going to make that layout simply named the exact same thing, at startup. Because for the most part, that lets me know that it is for me as a developer. Now, where did my startup go here? Manage database. I thought I had renamed that. There it is. And again, hopefully this isn't one of those mistake times, but well, I can't see a startup table in here for the life of me. Let's go ahead and finish that for right now. It's not currently based on any table. Let's go ahead. There it is. For some reason, it showed up there when I go in to double click and edit the actual layout. So now what we have is we have the startup layout. We also have the startup table occurrence, all based on the startup table. So that hopefully will make sense. Startup, startup, and startup. You just name them all the same thing. And this is going to be the fast way for starting up your FileMaker solution. Now, I'm also going to uncheck this. I don't want this layout to be visible or to be selectable, which would be right here is where you would find that. You would be able to select it if the user was able to see this layout. I don't want that, so I uncheck it. And then we just say we can get rid of the dialog for now. Now that we have all of the pieces in place, we can modify the layout, which I always suggest is we can get rid of the things that FileMaker automatically adds, which is the footer. I'll select that down here at the bottom, and I'll delete that. I'll select the header as well, and I'll delete that, because really all I'm going to need is the body. But here's how you're actually going to set the layout so that it is the startup. You're going to go up to the edit menu. You're going to, is it edit? It's not edit menu. I think it's edit menu in Windows, but on the Macintosh here, you're going to go to File Options is what we're going to select, because we want the options for this file. And this is where we're going to control two different aspects in order to make sure this startup is the layout that FileMaker loads first. The first one is this option right here in the File Options, and it's Switch to Layout. Now it's currently specified to the only user interface layout that I have in this file, but I'm going to specify this so that it's actually going to load on this startup layout. Now remember, I said that I name my developer tables with the @ symbol, and it's just for me and it's behind the scenes, and nobody ever really goes to those. Now here's where I'm going to leave the choice up to you, because I've done both. I have rigidly told myself that no user ever accesses a hidden developer layout, or they're not truly hidden, they're just turned off and not visible to the users. They're not hidden to you, of course, but nobody ever gets to see a dedicated developer table. And in this case, this would be the one excuse where a user could, because I know that they're starting up on a table that has no fields, unless it's fields that I want them to ask, and it's only going to be showing a startup screen. So they really couldn't get into the layout in order to mess anything up. So I know that about my particular startup. Now I've also done this a different way. I've done this where I've made yet another layout called startup without the @ symbol, so that was actually separated out from my developer tables. Now, out of all of these developer tables, these are all things that I would never want the user to actually see. It basically just has all the fields that I want to see as the developer, but on the startup one in particular, it really has nothing but the actual splash screen. And so I tend to do this just because that's my style of development. But of course, if you want to go rigid and you want to say, I'm not going to let the users access any of these, create a dedicated startup table, especially if you're going to have any type of selection process. Say you're going to provide a field where a user could select from a pop-up menu, and they choose from that pop-up menu that's sort of like those websites of where do you want to go in your banking website or what have you. So just recognize that I am sort of violating my own rule here on the startup, and I'm going to say okay. So I want FileMaker to start up on that startup layout, but there's one other thing that we can control with regards to the startup process, and that is here in the script triggers. In the script triggers, this is what I would suggest. I would almost always suggest that any released production FileMaker database specify bare minimum a on first window open, and then if you need it and you know you need it, an on last window close. So this is your startup script and your shutdown script. The startup script is what gives you control, obviously, to run whatever you want when the file is initially run. This is what in many other environments is called your bootstrap. This is where you're actually going to start everything up and make that happen. Now, one of those things might be going to the right layout that you want the user to be on. Now, in this case, the right layout that I want the user to be on is actually the functions layout, or the layout, let's go back to our layouts, that is this one layout right here. So what's happening is the file options is saying, okay, FileMaker, the very first thing that you're going to start up on, the layout you'll start up on, regardless of the startup script, is the startup layout. That startup layout is tied to the empty table. Therefore, FileMaker is not loading any fields and it's not loading any records, unless you happen to have one record with some globals. Very minuscule in terms of the data. Then the startup script is going to run. And when the startup script runs, that's when you're going to tell it to go to this particular layout. So you get the no load or the light load startup every time that the file is run. And this is especially important when you're running server-side scripts. If you have a FileMaker solution and you are starting up on a table where there's a lot of data that's loading, that's not good. You want to start up on the lightest weight table that you can. So this also happens to be where you can put your splash screen. So we'll take a look at the startup script here in a short while, but we're going to put the splash screen into our layout first off. Now, one of the things that I do with regards to the splash screen is I usually make it so that it accommodates the lowest form factor of where this database will be opened, and then I will scale it so that it will go all the way up to the largest form factor. So in this case, the largest display that I would, let's say, be able to have would be iMac 5K Retina. We're talking about super high resolution. But the smallest that I'm going to have is probably an iPhone. Now, an iPhone is going to run at 320 by 320. So I'm going to select the inspector here, and I'll choose the measurement system. I can control the height here and set that to 320. And it's just the body part that I'm going to have. And then I can actually scale this down to also 320. Now, if your database is only ever really going to be used on the desktop, you of course can do this at a much higher scale. It gives you more room to work with and so forth. For right now, we'll just pretend that this is going to be an iPhone and all the way up solution. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to the vector program that I use. Now, you can use a vector program or you can use a raster program, something like Photoshop. I like vector program because that's just where I design all of my designs, my icons, etc. In this scenario, I have this logo right here. Now, intentionally, what I've done is I have intentionally kept this super plain. I didn't add in a lot of the other information that I would have in here normally on the splash screen, because if I keep this really simple, then of course I can always add to it and even take away from it. So this I always keep to be my base graphic image, and then I'll add everything else. So let's take a look at another example that I have here of what I'm going to be using. These dev tools are just tools that I use, I've created for myself. Recently, I updated this one in particular, this script trigger reference. Now watch what happens as it opens. As it opens, we get this splash screen, and I don't know if you saw that, it was pretty quick. We will go to the layouts on this one. Here's that startup. I'll open that. And you can see right here, and it's going to show those little windows because this particular file is about script triggers. You can see right here that as I scale this window, notice that the graphic is actually scaling along with the window. Now, normally you don't want this to happen, and you're probably not going to have it happen because your startup script, well, I should say the startup layout of the file is going to land on this particular layout. then your startup script will take over and do whatever it wants to do. Now, in most cases, that's going to be a resizing and a centering. You're going to resize the window, and then you're going to center it. But you can see that wrapped around my base graphic here is all of the other things that I want to put about this splash screen. Now, it just so happens in this particular example, I'm using the same splash screen as a theme for multiple files. If it makes sense in your situation, of course, you can put all the information you want, all just in the graphic, and keep things really simple. So how do we add this in? Well, let's take a look. First off, I'm going to keep this off to the side here. I'm going to move it down to the bottom, move this down to the bottom, mostly because I want to access that information again. I don't want to redo that on screen. But what I am going to explain is how I actually get this out. Here in a copy of Sketch, which is a vector program that I like to use, I can select on this, basically they call it an artboard for this whole graphic. We can see right here as I select, I get a nice little rendering of information over here on the side in this particular tool. Photoshop, what have you, whatever you're going to use, this is telling you this is what it's going to look like when you export. Now the important thing here, and the great thing about this particular tool, and all of the Adobe tools support this as well, I believe, when you export, you're able to export using all of these different names, which they have now. They started with 1x and 2x, which is when they had the standard resolution and then the higher retina resolution, but then they keep taking it up even higher. Our devices keep showing more and more pixels in a smaller amount of space. So this is 3x, and 3x is pretty much the current standard. If you're watching this video way down in the future, maybe they're up to 4x and 5x now. But if I put a 3x on this logo and I now export this, and I do it to my desktop, I can actually call it splash screen or what have you. And I can save this for the web. It really doesn't matter in particular, this save for web. What this is going to do is it's going to rip out any of the EXIF metadata, which in this case I don't really care about because I'm going to be doing some yet further optimization on this particular graphic. So when I save this to the web, I'll just call it splash PNG or save for web. That got saved to the desktop. There is one other thing that I do in particular. Let's open up another window, and there on my desktop is Splash right there. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to load everything, well, I like everything in FileMaker that is going to load to be as light as possible. So here we can see that this is already 1.4 megabytes, which is not huge for this file. It's not that big of a deal, but we have to remember if we had, I don't know, 150 clients connecting to this, wouldn't it be nicer to load a smaller amount of data? In this case, a PNG image can always be optimized or squished. So I'm going to select this Splash PNG, and I happen to have a little application that I use called Launchbar. I just hit Command Space, which brought that up right now. If I double tap, in my case a control key, it will load whatever I have selected in the Finder, and then I can send that to any application. Now there is an application, as you can see right there, called Image Alpha, and you can go get this if you're on the Macintosh. If you're on Windows, then you're probably going to want to search for PNG optimization or something to that effect. So as I hit return, what that's going to do is sending that splash.png to that optimization tool. So we can see it come up and it loads right there, and I can scale this down to a 1/3 so we can see it on screen. But the biggest thing we're looking for here is that reduction right there. Image size, we're going from that many bytes. I'm not going to try to say how many it is, but we're saving 62% of the 1.4 megabytes. Now, it gets even better than that. As I save this image, there is yet another companion tool that this particular Image Alpha has, and that is called Image Optim right there. So with this box checked, what happens is if I save this as splash-optimized, and I click save, what's going to happen is we're going to see over here as this little symbol is giving us our indeterminate progress right here, we're saving yet currently another 11.8%. So yeah, this is getting picky. We're saving an extra 10%, but hey, 10% plus, that's what I'm going to take. So I basically reduced this by the 62% plus the 11. And when we open this up, we're going to see that the image quality, in fact, there's the optimized version. And there's the non-optimized version. You can see that I'm hitting the arrow key right here and switching between splash and splash optimized. And I'm pretty much here on my Retina screen as well on the video, you probably cannot see a difference other than the size by reducing it by more than half. And that is going from the 1.4 to the 468 kilobytes. So that's the image that I want. It's the 3 times optimized image that's going to go into my FileMaker layout. So we'll switch over to the FileMaker file now. And here we are back at our database with our 320 by 320. We're pretending that it's an iPhone image, and I am going to load this into my layout. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do this. First off, I want you to recognize that what I have selected is currently the body part. That is not the only place where you can load this graphic image. In fact, if I select on this area number 3, the Appearance tab, the way that you can tell what you have selected is by looking under the theme area of the body right here, and watch what happens as I select not on the body, but underneath just clicking on nothing in this area, and I click, and we go and we look at that. It is now switched to Layout Background. Now, some FileMaker developers don't know that this exists, but the Layout Background is something that you can set, and if you set the default, the layout background will be the same for all layouts. And the only thing that obscures the layout background is any given body part. Now the layout background extends across all layout parts, which is really pretty cool. So if I put this in the layout background, and I'm simply going to go to the graphic area here, and I'm going to choose an image, and it's going to prompt me for that image. I'll select on my desktop, and there is my splash optimized right there. I'll select that, double click to load it. That gets loaded in, and I can click on tile and all the other options here, which we will currently not be able to see. Now the question is why? Why can't we see that? Well, exactly what I just stated. Each body part of a layout can have its own setting for a background, as well as the background for all parts. So in this case, the body currently, as we select it and we take a look, has a solid color set. As soon as I actually set this to none, what will be revealed is my graphic behind. Now my graphic behind is obviously showing a very small chunk of the large graphic, because remember the graphic is a 3x graphic. So that's where we need to select off of the body. We are now selected back on the layout background, which is the default if nothing is selected, and we can switch this from tile to scale to fit or scale to fill. Which scale to fill is the one that I happen to use, because scale to fit will give you those, depending on, as you can see that as you size here, you will get your borders on either side of that in terms of those showing up here. So since this is actually not a square ratio, I'm not really going to do that 320 by 320. Let's go ahead and scale this out until it actually feels like it fits right there. And then I will switch this from scale to fit to scale to fill. And it'll basically just get rid of any of the white space that I have in there. Now remember, we kept that other file open, and I kept it open for a reason. That is so I can go over, beg, borrow, and steal. So I can go into any other file that I've created before and basically just take any other parts. You're going to see that I have this object right here. I have loading right there. I have this script trigger reference, and then I also have, nope, that's a line on the bottom of this actual text block. So if I select everything here and copy this, I'm able to go over to this file and paste it. It'll ask me if I want to extend. I'll say yes. Go ahead and just drag those on. It looks like I was actually using a much different size, which I can select on this in order to get the width. The width is 512, so let's just go ahead and set the layout part to 512 as well. Just save ourselves a little bit of a headache there. And I'll just make the height 512 as well. So again, you can make this as small as needed. You can put all of this information however you want. In this case, it's not fitting. Let me see. There's what I did differently on that one. In this one, I actually separated the body parts. I believe on this particular version, I made the actual body. Yep, we can see right there. On my original, I made the body part the container for the image, not the layout background. If I select over here, the layout background is just a solid blue, which actually that's a pretty good thing to know about. FileMaker has this rubber banding effect. If I go into browse mode on this layout and I rubber band, which I'm doing right now, I'm scrolling and I'm scrolling past the visible portion or past what FileMaker can show in the layout. And look what's happening up here up at the top. The rubber banding is causing the layout background to actually display. So that's probably the reason that I did it this way in this particular version of the file. I should have taken a look at this before. But even still, you've got the fundamentals now. You know that there is a layout background and body parts. And in this case, what I opted to do was I gave the footer its own dedicated part. I gave the body the actual graphic. And then I gave the background a color that I extracted from the image so that when the user actually was going to rubber band, if they actually did, it would be in that, it would show a nice color rather than something gaudy like a purple or an orange. So those are just two different ways you can do this. We'll keep moving forward with this particular example just because I'm not going to take the time to do all of that. I'll stretch this. Let's go to fill. I will go to the fill for the background and I'll scale to fit just for fun so that we can get that to be a little bit smaller. And we'll shrink this up right here. Shrink that up right there. One thing you do need to remember, and we'll move this up higher. That's just going to shrink it. It's not going to look the best, obviously. You get that. You can obviously do all the realignment to accommodate whatever you need. Make the font a little bit smaller there. And I could, if I need to, give this a solid color and fill it with something that I steal from the background. Let's say this blue. Don't know why it didn't get that, but it should have. Okay. Fine. FileMaker with magnifying glass is supposed to grab the color. It's not. We'll just set one right there. Ugly as it is, I think you get the idea of what we're trying to do here. In terms of the splash screen, when I go into browse mode, this of course is going to look terrible. And here's why. The one thing you need to be aware of, when I select this bottom part, the reason that I put this in the footer over here is that when you put a scale to fill or a scale to fit on your graphic, you're going to, anything that you put around the graphic, you're going to need to anchor relative to how you want the graphic to actually display. So when I select this graphic and go to the position tab, you're going to see that it in particular is being anchored on the top right there. You can see only that one lock is anchored. If I select this loading graphic, you can see that it's anchored to the bottom and the two sides. And this is anchored all over the place. So in this scenario, what's going to happen is, because this is all on the body part, this particular object is going to scale and become the largest because of its anchoring right here. As opposed to over here on this side, because it's only contained within its one body part of a footer, it really isn't going to scale beyond the dimensions of the footer. And in particular, this object, because it's anchored to the bottom of the body part itself, right here, when you drag, this particular object is actually forcing the footer to stay constrained to the size that it is. So that's basically how the anchoring is going to work. If I want to switch this off by turning that off, I should get a pretty decent render on this. My graphic's still going to scale and get bigger, but my bottom part is going to stay there. My loading is staying at the bottom, but you can see that the graphic, because it's scaled to fit, doesn't look the best. But you can see if you go over here and you tweak with it a little bit, you will get some relative scaling that as it scales out, what you're able to do is you're able to go from your smallest size and then use proportionally larger sizes if you want to use a larger version of display for that splash screen. So basically that's my whole reasoning for actually doing that. I can make it show a larger version on a larger screen, but yet still look great on a smaller screen. So we're pretty much close to done in this particular case, and that is because we don't have a whole lot left to do other than the startup script. So what's going to happen is FileMaker by default, because of those file options, when we take a look at them again, is going to initially start up on our startup layout. Our startup layout is empty, and we've got the splash screen there contained. What we need to do now is simply either center this or leave it as is. You can leave it where you want, or we can do any number of things. I like to center things. So let me show you how I actually do that. I have a very easy custom function that I use. So over here in my older example, I'm going to go to Manage and go to Custom Functions. And I have this one custom function that I like to use right here called Window Center. I created this a while ago, and it takes a parameter of a dimension. And what it does is it's going to attempt to center the window within wherever it resides. Now, that quote-unquote wherever it resides part can be the whole of a screen, or it can be a parent window. So many times I've had a situation, and let me copy this. I'll just copy it, and we will take it over to our custom function database, and I will paste it here. Don't have a paste button, but we can do it with Control or Command V. So we've got Window Center in here. Let's take a look quickly at this. You can see that if you look at the notes in this particular function, it's using locally scoped variables, or you can use locally scoped variables within your script. So basically what this script does is it attempts to look for these particular variables. So I've created some dedicated variables that you can set prior to calling this custom function. And if in the event that you have a parent window, that means you've got your regular user interface window that loads first, and then you want to show a centered window on top of that. Well, if you set these values of parent window height, parent window width, top, left, and then you set a child window and a child window height, this particular custom function will calculate out the top and the left that window needs to have in order for it to be centered within the parent. If you don't provide the parent values, then it basically uses the screen that the window is on. And that's what all of the rest of this code does right here. It basically just takes into account, do I have a parent window? If I don't, then use the current window desktop width or the desktop height. And that's really all that this does. But it's a very simple function to implement, which is really pretty nice. And you simply just add this into your startup screen. So if we go over to our manage scripts, which we are in now, we are going to look for our startup script, which is right here. In particular, our startup script on this example is only doing two things currently. It is restoring state, and it's doing a plugin check. Now here's what I love about how this implementation of a startup screen works. You already know that the FileMaker database is on the screen that is the startup screen, that it's a low impact startup table. That's wonderful. You don't have to do anything for this script. FileMaker has already done it. All you have to do is remember what do I want done to that window. Well, one of those things is going to be a pause. So you can pause for however long you want. I like to throw a 2 to 3 second time. Let's do 3 seconds. That, of course, is going to go up at the very top of this startup script. I'm also going to center that window, or move resize the window. And I will put that there. I'm also going to adjust the window. Now, adjusting the window, when a FileMaker database is closed, the FileMaker window, or FileMaker will attempt to open that database according to the last window that was shown when it closes. So this is where you would want to possibly use the shutdown script in order to do an adjustment again. But if we set this adjustment to resize to fit on startup, that window will actually become the absolute dimensions of the window. So again, if I had designed this for the lower 320 by 320, the smallest of my form factors for an iPhone, then it would turn out that would be very tiny on a larger screen. So I would obviously want to scale that up within the proportions. So here's where you would need to adjust the logic, where if it was an iPhone, you would simply you wouldn't even need to do the adjust window resize to fit. But if you were using the same splash screen, which you can because you've got a much larger graphic, you would basically just get the proportions that you want depending on the proportions of the monitor that's being used. So in this case, I'll just resize to fit. I know it's doing whatever 512 by 512. And then on the move resize window, we'll take a look at those settings and we will put those in. Here's where the distance from top and the distance from left come into play. We don't need the height and we don't need the width because those are automatically accounted for with the adjust window. So here's where you get that really nice magic of being able to put just window center. And this dimension, I don't know if you saw this within the actual custom function, I made it so that it can take, you can put X, you can put top, or you can put vertical, or you can just put vert. So all I'm looking for is the vert of vertical, or what have you. And so whatever is easiest for you, I believe I'm on the, am I on the top part? I believe I am. We'll say okay. Yep. So there we go. Distance from top. I just use the same language. I copy this and I put this and I change top to left. And that's it. That one custom function is automatically going to move that window. So first it'll be resized, then it'll be moved to the center of the screen. We will pause for 3 seconds, and then the rest of our normal startup process. And that's it. That's how we can add a low impact startup screen, which will basically give us so many advantages. One, it makes our solution look more professional, given that it's, you know, a nice, pretty startup screen. But two, it gives us a fast load time because we don't have to actually, we're not loading any records as part of our startup. So if we shut this script down, we should get that nice startup. Let's go ahead and hide everything else here, hide our windows, and take a look, make sure that it's going to start up. We can close that database and that one. Get rid of that, and we'll close the script trigger reference. And there we go. So now I should be able to open this. This operation cannot be completed. Target part, that's probably part of my shutdown script that I'll have to fix. But now when I open a recent and it is a custom function database, there's my, the only thing I might want to do is turn off that toolbar, but we can see right there, I can resize and resize this out. Let's go modify it one more time. Let's show hide our toolbars. In this case, we want our toolbars off for the startup. We will then show them after we're done, and we will also do another adjust resize. So there is our process right there. It opens up, we resize. Well, first we hide our toolbars, we resize, we center, we wait for the 3 seconds that the splash screen shows. We then turn our toolbars on because I'm using them in this particular case. And finally, after we've done all of our stuff, we resize to fit because I believe restore state, we might need to actually put in our go-to layout here to make sure we're on the right layout, which is my startup or the proper layout of my user interface right there. So we'll use that one. We'll save it, close that window, close that. We'll reopen our recent again. And there we go. No toolbars, centered window, and boom. And we're exactly where we want to be with regards to the startup process. So it looks like I did get a few people in the chat here. I can switch and show that up on screen if anybody had any questions. There was one question that came in. The theme layout, go no @ symbol, is that correct? The theme layout in this particular, yes, that also, I think the question is about this particular layout. One of the things that I do in my database is I will create a particular layout where I manage all of my different theme objects. So when we open this and look at it, you can see that I'm basically, it's just where I style all of my objects. This would be a developer layout as well that I wouldn't actually put onto the into the selectable layouts. Really, if you're using FileMaker as FileMaker, then this menu right here is where users can see any layout that is checked over here in the layout. So if I check these, I of course would not want this particular situation right here. So theme I would not want them to see this, etc. If you're not using FileMaker's default functionality, then typically you are hiding the status bar. You're not showing that, and the user can't access it anyway. But just always remember, you want to uncheck any layouts that if this is ever showing, you don't want users to actually be able to get into that. So I think that's going to bring this video to a close, unless anybody else had any other questions. There are only 13 of us on the chat. Again, this was an unannounced live recording of my video because I wanted to get this out this seemed like the easiest way. In the future, I will make announcements of when I'm going to actually be doing these types of videos, and people can ask questions as I actually do the development. Hopefully this video has helped you out, and let's get my nice little music right there going. As always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own file development, and until next time, happy file making.